My name is Tyler Stevens, and I'm one of the founding principals of Core 10 Architecture. I'm also a father of two, and a husband, and an elder at Central Presbyterian Church. I wanted to be an architect very early on in life, so I don't know that I was ever anything else. My parents tell me that I told them that's what I was going to do at age 5, and I was pretty much drawing plans ever since I could hold a pencil. For me, there's a direct correlation between being called as an architect and called as a Christian. I begin each project with a prayer of, Lord, help me to see the building that you already have in mind. When I study Scripture, I see that there are design principles that God has given us, woven into our fabric. There are rules and regulations of scale, size, proportion that were laid out by God in those instructions that they create a pattern. And they're in specific designs that He gave directly, the Garden of Eden, the Ark, the Temple, and the New Jerusalem to come. Now, these principles and parameters have been used by designers throughout history across all cultures, whether they knew it or not. And so therefore it was only fitting that in starting the design for Greentree Church, these same parameters, these same design principles should be used to govern the outlay of this building. To give you an example of what I'm talking about in these principles, if you follow the design layout of the garden specifically, but then also the temple, you'll notice that God always uses these axes, these very strong axes of organization. In the temple, there's a strong axis going in one direction. It leads to a side parallel axis that centers on the Holy of Holies, and that becomes the most important space in the temple. In the garden, there are the 4 cardinal points centered on the tree in the center of the garden. So there's this notion that the center is your primary focus, what you're all about. You can see this carried out through cathedral design in history when the basic cathedral plan was outlaid, which, by the way, mimics, of course, the cross. This is the other thing where you pick up these axes of design from our own bodies. We are symmetrical, we have an axis up and down, side to side, and all of it is centered on our heart, which correlates to the altar in the cathedral plan. So it's very much tied together. You'll see that repeated in the design here for Greentree, because even though Greentree is a modern church and not as traditional as a cathedral, I still felt it important to draw upon these axes and get down to what is the most important thing, which of course for this building is the preaching of the Word, which is you'll find at the center of the axes in the sanctuary. At the head, of course, is the cross at the beginning of the stage. This is the focus, of course, the gospel. At the foot, then, is where this church is different from other churches. The back of the sanctuary is a glass wall. The axis that leads down the aisle goes right through and to the outside, because this church is very much about blending both the world outside and the world inside the church. One design element that was a little bit risky for us in this structure is the columns and the trusses that you see in both the fellowship hall and the sanctuary. Now, typically these would be covered by drywall or trim. Here they are left exposed. And this is really a reminder to us as who we are as people, exposed before God and each other. Despite the fact that there are chips, flaws in the wood, all of that, there's a real beauty in the honesty of the material. Part of the DNA of this church interacting with the community around, it means that fellowship is a very important aspect. For this particular building, I wanted to take the fellowship hall out of the basement underneath the sanctuary where it typically occurs, bring it up and put it on the ground so that it could serve simultaneously with the sanctuary and the outdoor room itself. In Kirkwood, the idea of porches on buildings is very important. This is how the building interacts with the outdoors. This building has several porches that are key. There's one on the lower level outside the playground, which is the porch of the nursery, a fantastic place for kids to draw on the wall with chalk and have their own space. Another occurs at the youth room down on the opposite corner of the building. This is the youth having their own space, their own little plaza right outside of their room. And then finally, of course, there's the big porch outside of the sanctuary for the entire church. For any design project, when I start, I like to analyze the building in terms of its site, how it sits in the community, how it will be viewed by people who both use it and just drive by, how people will approach it, enter it, and eventually call it home. In this particular project, the glass wall at the back of the sanctuary was very important from day one. This is the thing that allows the main focus of the church and the sanctuary, the axes that I mentioned earlier, to flow both in and out of the building. It starts with the trees out on Kirkwood Road, which march right down the street in line. Those trees will march right through this outdoor room, which is an extension of the sanctuary on the outside, a transition, if you will, for people who are not used to the church. And then the trees culminate inside the sanctuary as literal columns, and their canopy as in the trusses above. I hope that people see this visual connection, because it's really a reminder of what my prayer is for this congregation, that the building will be a vehicle to go out into the community, to take the gospel outside of the building into the surrounding community and interact and draw people into the church through those organizing elements.